It had been raining since Tuesday, and the ground was already saturated. The forecast for the Mother's Day weekend in 2006 was for rain. The storm was expected to reach the East Coast by Sunday night. It had the potential to develop into a major nor'easter that would affect the northeastern United States from late Sunday into Monday. Estimates were for up to 3 inches of rain. This satellite photo shows the storm over the Great Lakes on Thursday, May 11th, moving toward the northeast. While 3 inches of rain is significant, no one was overly concerned about what was to happen. The Department of Public Works began its normal pre-storm maintenance.
We send our crews out before it starts raining, and we open up the catch basins, we clear the leaves, we pump certain catch basins that we know are particular issues. We check all the grates at Elk Pond and on Washington Street and down at Elk Grove as well.
I know that this city holds about 3.5 inches.
As the storm moved eastward and reached the coast, it was joined by another storm moving up from the south. Then something unexpected happened. The storms intensified and remained stationary for the next 3 days, eventually dumping almost 12 inches of rain on the city. If the rain continued, city officials knew what was going to happen.
When I was at the city yard and I saw the pond crest, and when the pond crests over Lewis Monk Field, it happens very quickly. We all know near the soccer field how the Fellsway closes. But when the pond goes over into Lewis Monk, then I know we're in trouble. Soon after that, you know that the line all the way, outlets going to Winthrop all the way to the sea are log jammed. And then we literally are in a bad spot. And that's when Converse Lane area goes. That's when the Fells totally goes. That's when you have to look at the brooks in back of the Steelhouse coming from Wakefield. They overflow their banks coming off Greenwood. That's when that goes. That's when the towers starts bubbling over because the MWR line is gone. The Roosevelt has gone. Then you have to deal with sewage across the city because then you know that Deer Island is backed up. And then you start getting the calls, and then it goes pretty quickly. And that's what I knew. And we were sitting in the room just praying. Oh, I think it's late. I think we said, I think it's stopping. I think it's stopping. It's almost like a delusional hope or, prayer. But I remember it. That storm is something I'll never forget in my life.
So we were aware of where to expect our problems and which ones would flood first and give us a hint as to how the storm is moving on us.
Residents in flood-prone areas also knew what was going to happen.
Generally, our history with previous floods has been once the Fimianis on Bay State Road get water, we have approximately 2 hours to pick up our stuff before we start, taking on water ourselves. Saturday night, the Fimianis had already begun to have water in their basement. We made the decision to go out to eat for Mother's Day. And our daughter called us at 11 o'clock to say, you need to come home, the water's coming in. So by 11 o'clock, we were beginning to take water in on Saturday night.
Flooding was rapidly getting worse as the rain continued. People watched the TV weather reports, hoping that it was going to end soon.
So that rain sits in one spot and just keeps coming in.
The weather outlook was ominous, and city officials began their review of emergency plans.
Hit by more rain for late tomorrow night, early Tuesday morning.
We're thinking about how to fight it, where we need our crews, what roads we're going to have to shut down, do we have the barricades, the barrels, and keeping in touch with fire and police and making sure that the mayor's aware of what's going on and that notices are going out to MMTV, to the newspapers, to whoever needs to know where we are and what we're doing.
I knew that we're going to need to house possibly a lot of people in a very short period of time. So we called the MBTA to make sure we have enough buses to transport people. We make sure we have our ambulances service in case people are in need of medical attention in-house. And most importantly, and I believe that makes us a little different, is that I have never believed in the concept of bringing people into a gym with cots. I think it creates an extraordinary stressful environment. Doesn't allow people to get themselves together and heal after going through a traumatic experience. So I immediately booked about 300 hotel rooms, and we went through all the hotels, and they worked with us. because I didn't have a credit card or a check to give them. We knew that if we needed to evacuate a large number of people, which we were thinking obviously the towers and the steel house, but countless others that live in areas, that they would be given a warm place to live and to be able to relax and really handle an extraordinary stressful situation and a really devastating loss.
On Sunday afternoon, it became apparent that residents in several parts of the city were in distress. Fire and police did what they could, but the city needed help from the state to help with a mandatory evacuation of the Melrose Towers condominium complex.
We could not handle the situation in this sense. We had the Melrose Towers, which has a large portion of elderly disabled people, that was in 12 feet of water. And our fire trucks could not get in there. We needed an evacuation, mainly because all the electrical supplies of the buildings were underwater, and it became a fire hazard, and you had a number of people in there. There's two challenges there. One, most people don't want to leave. They like to wait, particularly elderly people that are disabled. They want to be in their own homes. People with pets. And how do you get them out? How do you get them out? And I'd have to say, within a half hour, we saw an invasion of this community of amphibious vehicles, of help that I'll never forget. And the governor was here, and there were many military people here, and they not only helped us in terms of getting these people out because we simply didn't have the capability of doing it, but provided great relief in terms of the amount of fatigue that our fire and police forces and DPW forces were going through, because they were, giving 110% for 40 hours in in a very emotional situation when many of their own homes had been affected or evacuated.
While the state helped with the tower's evacuation, local crews evacuated residents at the Steel House and from Haywood Ave.
We're talking a whole lot of water. We've lost their power rooms, their emergency generator, the elevators are down.
This is the most severe I've ever seen it.
Yes, we have a bit of water. Yeah, we were afraid it was going to rise up.
Everything I own is ruined.
We bought the house in the wrong place, I guess.
As city officials assisted residents, homeowners throughout the city fought the water, often losing the battle. Some were able to hold the water at bay with pumps, but some couldn't keep up with the water, especially if the electricity was turned off.
We totally lost it when the power was turned off. There was no fighting it. Within a half an hour, we probably had close to the 30 inches of water in our basement. I mean, it was just...
Came in pretty quick.
Carlsons weren't alone. Flooding was happening all over the city, even in homes that had never had water from rain. Melrose was not unique in its problems. Many cities and towns were flooded, and some faced additional flooding from rivers and streams that had not yet crested. It was with this backdrop that the governor declared a state of emergency on Sunday afternoon. While attending to the needs of the city's residents, the mayor also had to deal with an emergency at home.
The worst thing about it was that it was my wife's first Mother's Day, and she was kind of looking forward to that because all her sister and her, everyone else got the big celebration. She was looking forward to that. So I missed my wife's first Mother's Day. So what we had to do, I remember, is I packed her up, and I said, "You have to go to your mother's house in Saugus, for I know that you're there and the baby's okay, and stay there as long as you need." Now, she lives right over the border of Wakefield and Saugus. It took my wife 2.5 hours to drive from where I live, which is right on the Wakefield line, to the Wakefield-Saugus line. And that was because all the roads were literally closed off. So, I felt bad about that. But she understands that this is what I do, and I'm very lucky to have a wife that understands that.
In any emergency, keeping people informed is a critical task.
And I wanted to make sure that people felt that there was someone in charge and that there was someone that was going to treat them as well as a family member would treat them in terms of making sure they were warm and fed and safe, and that people were kept well informed, which I think one of the big heroes in this whole challenge for our community was public access television. This was probably the first major incident in the city of Melrose, which was, as big as the blizzard of '78 in terms of damage and effect on people's lives. But back then they didn't have public access. I was able to go on public access, as was, the emergency management team, to keep people informed and keep people secure in the knowledge that there was going to be people to help them, both in terms of reimbursement or in terms of assistance. And I think people are stronger than we give them credit for, and if they're given the right information and they feel that someone is explaining to them what is happening, that they'll rise to the occasion, and a lot of people did.
Unfortunately, for those trying to stay ahead of the water, or for those with no electricity, public access or broadcast television couldn't keep them informed.
Other than the fire department coming to rescue that family, we really didn't see very many emergency workers during the worst part of the flood.
Town workers would come by, the road crew would be by every once in a while.
But they never stopped to tell us anything or to ask if people were okay.
Right. There was no information given.
Sometimes the best way to communicate is the old-fashioned way, as Alderman Ron Seaboyer did by visiting not only the Carlsons, but many others in distress.
He kept coming and kept giving us information and kept checking with us to make sure that everybody was okay, and kind of kept us informed about the fact that if we wanted to go to a hotel, the city would put us up in a hotel. We opted to stay here because we have pets and whatever, but a number of people in the neighborhood did take advantage of that.
The rain slowed on Tuesday, May 16th, and the sun finally reappeared on Wednesday. It was now time to assess the damage and start the cleanup. But in some places, the water had not yet receded. It was going to be a long process to clean up homes, city streets, parks, and buildings. Where the water had receded, homeowners saw the damage up close and struggled with the enormity of the cleanup task ahead.
That's the height right there, about 29 inches of water we had in the basement.
For several days after the rain stopped, some residents, especially from the tower's condominiums, were still being housed in hotels. Alderman Ron Seaboyer was again doing his part to help those in need. These letters to the editor of the Free Press expressed residents' thanks to Seaboyer for his help.
He was leaving his house to come and, check up on us. And he did that every day and kept a record of what we were in need of when our heat was turned on, when our power was turned back on. And he was amazing, I think.
He did a good job.
Neighbors helped each other, and some help came from unexpected sources. These Coast Guard personnel from Boston came to lend a hand.
We worked a couple of houses up on the top of the hill yesterday. We pumped out a couple basements up there. And now we're down here to see if we can help down here.
Sometimes the help comes from outside of the city. One Melrose church, the Church of Christ, made a special effort to help.
Their main parish center in Tennessee hired a truck, and that truck was full of cleaning supplies because people needed cleaning supplies. And they drove that truck from Tennessee to that church, and the entire church was almost like a giant Walmart of cleaning supplies. And most of the people in that church don't even live in Melrose. It's a very it's a church that caters to the needs of people from all around, and that was something. That was really something. I mean, for a very small church to put that together, particularly from Tennessee, was unbelievable.
Once the water drained or was pumped out, a steady stream of trash made it to the sidewalks. The Department of Public Works needed extra help to cope with the piles of furniture, rugs, clothes, and anything else ruined by the flood.
During that whole week that we were recovering, from the major damage, the DPW was absolutely amazing. They were telling us to get rid of everything because it had the sewerage in it, and daily they were coming by, and the amount of trash that they took from here was just unbelievable.
The local papers printed many stories about the storm and its aftermath. Residents expressed their gratitude to those who lent a hand during the crisis. As the cleanup continued, the city was coordinating with state and federal agencies to assist residents with flood relief funds to help repair and rebuild.
This whole Middlesex County was a massive area. This wasn't just Melrose or Wakefield. This was, there was millions and millions and millions of dollars worth of damage throughout the entire Commonwealth, and particularly this area, Revere and all the watershed areas. We allowed them to use this as a home base. And when the federal government sets up shop in your hometown, it gives us as administrators greater access to them and allows us to process quicker. So I think that was a key point by making Melrose the hub of disaster relief.
While having FEMA operating in Melrose helped speed the process, it did not guarantee that homeowners got enough money to cover the cost of repairs.
The process went smoothly. They gave us the same amount of money, actually, that they had given us the first time that we were flooded, when our only damage was to our carpeting in our basement. You know, this time, as I said, we had damage to the heating system, and you know, basically what they gave us.
Extensive, but you know, the money was pretty minimal. But you know, and the excuse was that, you know, a lot of the money had gone down to New Orleans, and that they still haven't recovered from all the money that they had put out. Really,
it was disappointing. They led us to believe that a large part of the damage would be covered by FEMA, and that proved not to be the case at all.
Working through a major emergency provides new insights into people and planning.
When there's an emergency, those who are responsible for dealing with those emergency, police and fire, do an extraordinary job. I have to say that. I mean, this was a very trying situation. I also learned that the systems that were in place are strong and good, that we've learned from every storm, and that documentation was key. I learned that this is a community of very strong neighborhoods, and that people, although may not be as close in terms of neighborhoods as we once remember, maybe our older people remember, it brought neighbors together, and it brought people together that had not been particularly close but live on the same street. And that was out of hardship and coping and dealing with the challenges that they had. I also learned that we have a number of organizations in the community that are helpful and step up in these situations, that we live in a community that's very generous and will help you if you need help.
Once the immediate crisis had passed, the questions of why the flooding occurred and what could be done to prevent it were on the minds of many residents. As with most matters, the issues are complicated and not new.
There was a certain time in this community and several others where due diligence simply was not done to create an infrastructure that supported the houses that were being developed. Let's be honest. I mean, some people live in neighborhoods and homes that should never have been built, and that's a terrible thing, and it's not the people's fault that live there now, but I wish the type of comprehensive planning that, you know, exists in many cases today existed back then. And I think in many times it was selfish developers that wanted to make the most money they could, and really I would have to say a management of City Hall that didn't dot the I's and cross the T's, or decided to look the other way. And that happened for a very long time, and we're paying the price.
The map we're looking at now is the original drainage layout of the surface drains for the city of Melrose back in 1900. And what this shows, it's multicolor, and the colors indicate what the drainage areas are. Because Melrose is an old city, and this work was done in the early 1900s, we have culverts that are under capacity, don't have the capacity to handle the type of development that's happened in Melrose. There used to be grass and trees in Melrose. Mostly Melrose is pavement. The houses are close together, the business, there's not a lot of open land for development. It's been paved over, a lot of impervious area. That means runoff. Not just in Melrose, but a lot that comes through Wakefield and Stoneham comes through Melrose as well. So as they grow, additional runoff comes into Melrose. So we have some challenges on how to get this water out of the city. But what we do have, what we're able to do is we're able to address our own issues in Melrose and provide substantial relief to the residents of Melrose.
Because serious flooding affected several parts of the city, a multi-part solution was required.
In 2003, we completed a report for the EPA and FEMA and MEMA when we got funded for the El Pond second outlet. I believe we got a $1.7 million plus a $1 million city bond. And for Converse Lane, $1.1 million, I think, from FEMA, and a $400,000 city bond. So those projects had started prior to the flooding, and the flooding helped solidify the approval process on those, identifying that, you know, this is the problem, these were the solutions we're anticipating, and recognizing that those are those are good solutions as FEMA and MEMA come in and they walk with us and understand what happened.
While the second drainage outlet at Elk Pond will help, residents of the tower's condominiums let city officials know that they must fix the sewerage problems, an issue plaguing the area since before 1977. Earlier efforts to correct the problem were not enough.
There's a pump station on Upham Street at the Saugus line would pump the sewage from the northeast corner of the city down through under where the new Walgreens is, across Johnny's Food Master, down through the towers. And so it added significant amount of sewage into the system that as it's at the towers, which surcharges. So part of that was that project removed 1.2 million gallons of sewage out of the system, significantly reducing the amount of sewage that's at the towers and therefore significantly reducing the chances of sewer surcharges.
An area that had significant flooding, but not as much attention, is Lebanon and Sylvan Streets at the cemetery.
And when that floods fairly deep, 5, 6 feet. The houses in that area always flood, and the cemetery floods. None of that is a good situation. So part of what we're doing down there is we're looking at the entire drainage system as the roadway drainage system as it comes through the cemetery and outlets through the Pine Banks area. And there's significant challenges there with the drainage system, and we have a program to upgrade and replace some pipes that have collapsed and to upgrade the system in there to try to address the flooding problems at that particular location as well.
Through the years, Ward 2 residents have had significant flooding problems. Work done in 1999 in the Damon and Hayward Ave section was supposed to have solved the problem. Obviously, it had not.
There is flooding problems and there are water table problems. Water table problems mean that your house was built on land where the water table is very high, and the city can't do anything about that. That's where your house was built, and there are many bog-type areas in our city, and obviously when you research, when you buy your house, you need to understand the makeup of the ground in which you're buying on. And that oftentimes is just unsolvable. That's why people have sump pumps. It's the idea of moving water from the problem area out, and that doesn't work in 2 blocks. So when you have a 4-lane highway of piping going to 2-lane on Boardman Ave, then to 1 lane, then to 3 lanes, you have to make the whole system comprehensively done. So that's what makes the Ward 2 project so difficult, because you're ripping up the entire neighborhood, because that's the only way to do it, and that's $6 million. It's easy to do a project for $800,000 and tell people you did something to solve it, when that's just not the case.
There are real challenges with the Ward 2 issue. One is because 2/3 of the drainage area that brings water into that ward is in Wakefield, and we have no control over the development or how that water is handled and how that comes into the city. We also have the challenge that the drainage system that was installed sometime between 1900 and 1950, which was designed or laid out in 1900, was based on what they believed to be the building that they'd have in that area, and that obviously was significantly less than what ultimately went into that area. So that the Bennett's Pond Brook, which is the major waterway that came out of that area, and the Bennett's Pond got filled in when they built the Fellsway, and they have small culverts under the Fellsway. The Bennett's Pond Brook passes under the Fellsway maybe 4 times, and then eventually goes down to the interchange and gets into the Saugus River down near Route 1. We can't upgrade those. They're outside our ability to do, and they're cost prohibitive, essentially. I mean, it's a very, very expensive project. But we can help ourselves. We can still do things, and what we can do is we can get that water out of Ward 2 faster, and we can take out more water so that we reduce our flooding and reduce the repetitiveness, how often it does flood. And every property in that Ward 2 will flood less than it currently does, or the same that it currently does. It won't flood more. Now downstream, will that mean issues? Well, of course, we're putting the same amount of water is actually going there, but we're putting some of it there a little faster than it used to be. So there may be some downstream issues. We haven't fully identified those yet, and we haven't looked into them. We're looking for mitigation on that. We're not looking to hurt anybody downstream, and we know we have issues that we still haven't resolved at this point in time.
As part of the construction process, city employees have been visiting residents and holding meetings to explain the proposed changes. Given the past failures of fixes for flooding in Ward 2, there is some skepticism among residents that the changes will work. Some of the construction in Ward 2 requires working on private property. If residents don't allow the city access, the project will stop.
It's a neighborhood issue, it's a neighborhood problem, and it's a neighborhood solution. And we do have to go across some property to dig and put a pipe underground, which won't particularly affect their drainage issue at all. We're not bringing water, we're not going to cause them to flood more than they do now. It's just a way to get a pipe from point A to point B. We will restore the property back to where it was. Anything we break we'll replace and fix, so they'll be made whole on those issues. But if someone stands up and says, no, you can't come on our property, the City of Melrose does not do takings, so they won't use that power, and the project won't happen.
And when you fix it, that means dirt, dust, detours, loud noise, and I don't want to be the one that have to do it, but either I say, hey, I didn't do it and you shouldn't have lived there, or you try to fix it, and I think the right way is to try to fix it.
Although not anxious to have multi-year construction in front of their home again, the Carlsons are hopeful that this time it will work and understand that this is a community effort and shared pain.
It seems much more likely that it will work this time around. I'd have to say that I think the mood in the neighborhood is similar to the despair that Tim talked about. I mean, we were dug up for 2 full summers, and the dust and the dirt and the noise for the whole summer was not something we're looking forward to going through again.
I also noticed that people, once they get through these projects, because we've done a lot of them, they're happy with the outcome. They have a new road, they have more trees, they have better quality of life. So it's almost like they forget about the trials and tribulations. I live off Main Street, so I live on that side. And I went through that Main Street project with a new baby every 15 minutes hearing, ba-ba-ba-ba-ba, and big trucks. But now it's the greatest thing ever. If you have a carriage, Main Street's the greatest thing that ever happened to my life. I mean, my life is, is different than some others, but I love it. And I don't recall those bad mornings when I finally put the baby down and the backhoe decides to go down my street. That's my reality. I live here too,
The city is spending millions on infrastructure improvements, but there is no guarantee that future storms will not cause flooding.
Drainage projects can only be designed to a certain storm, and at some point it becomes cost prohibitive. As you look at some of the flood documentary pictures and the videos, you can see that the significant amount of flooding that went through the city, there's no drainage project that could prevent that from happening. For example, we double the capacity of water that we can get out of a particular area. That's significant. That means a lot of storms are not going to flood that they used to flood to. And it has to be a very severe storm now. And now, instead of flooding yearly, maybe they only flood once every 10 years when one of these major storms comes in that you just couldn't possibly handle. So it helps them in that regard. It also helps in how long that water stays there when it does flood. So that with the new systems, that water will come out of the flood areas very quickly. So within a day or two, the floodwaters have receded.
I think that we can make our mark as the generation that helps solve many of the problems that have been plaguing this city for 100 years. That's not just investment in our pipes and water, but that's also building things like the new middle school. That is comprehensive planning for new development. That's a number of issues that we've brought forward that in many cases cause aggravation to people but solve problems. So I've always said, let us be the generation, let this be the generation that solve the problems. And I think people, as I said in my inaugural address, my hope being here is that people 50 years from now say, geez, thank God that group did what they had to do.
The construction to reduce or eliminate the flooding is costing millions. For those who suffered through the flooding and for the taxpayers of Melrose, let's hope it works.